Welcome to the podcast. I'm Jimmy, your host. Tonight, we begin with something gentle, something slow, something that doesn't really need your full attention. So go ahead and dim the lights. Let your phone rest somewhere safe. Close your eyes if you want, or don't. No pressure here. Tonight's story is about a forest, a very old forest, and a very tired one. And yes, because this is never simple, it's a forest that forgot how to be dark. Now, normally, forests do a great job with darkness. They're basically professionals. They invented it. Shadows, whispers, that unsettling feeling that something is watching you, but politely chooses not to say hello. But this forest, it forgot. The Forest of Lethrin, because of course it had a dramatic name, had not seen true night in over 300 years. No sunset, no stars, no moonrise sliding gently between the branches like a secret. Just light. Not harsh light, not blinding. Just a soft, endless glow, like late afternoon that refused to move on with its life. The leaves never slept. The birds never stopped watching. Even the moss looked mildly exhausted. And at first, centuries ago, everyone thought this was wonderful. Merchants came from far away because it was safer to travel without nightfall sneaking up on you. Poets arrived, wrote terrible poems about eternal afternoon, and left feeling very proud of themselves. Lovers walked the paths forever because there was never an awkward moment when one of them said, "It's getting late." It was, briefly, romantic. But romance, like milk, has an expiration date. After a while, the animals grew restless. Owls forgot why they had such large eyes. Fireflies hovered awkwardly, glowing in daylight like performers who missed their cue. And the trees, ancient things with long memories, began to whisper about dreams they could no longer finish. Because sleep, it turns out, requires darkness, and the forest hadn't slept in a very long time. At the edge of this glowing woodland lived a man named Elric. He was not a king, not a hero, not even particularly impressive. He was a traveler, which is a polite way of saying he didn't stay anywhere long enough for people to expect things from him. Elric had autumn in his bones. You could see it in the way he walked, slow, thoughtful, like every step had a memory attached. His coat always smelled faintly of leaves and smoke. His hair had begun to grey early, not from age, but from thinking too much. Of course, he was the type to think too much. People like that always are. He arrived at the forest one afternoon, which confusingly looked exactly like every other afternoon, and immediately felt wrong about it. Not scared, just off. The air hummed, not loudly, just enough to notice if you were quiet inside your own head. Elric paused at the tree line and sighed, because naturally, this is where his life decided to get interesting. "I won't be long," he told no one in particular. The forest, being awake and very bored, listened. As he stepped in then, the light shifted, not darker, just deeper. Like the glow had weight, the leaves above him shimmered in gold and amber tones, frozen in a permanent autumn that never quite fell. No leaf ever reached the ground here. They hovered, suspended, undecided, romantic, yes, also deeply unsettling after 10 minutes. Elric walked for what felt like hours, though the light never changed enough to mark time. His thoughts began to slow, stretch. Memories drifted up uninvited. That was the forest's doing. Lethrin collected unfinished things, unfinished thoughts, unfinished loves, songs people forgot halfway through humming. It fed on them quietly, not cruelly, just constantly. Eventually, Elric reached a clearing. At its center stood a tree unlike the others. Its bark was pale, almost silver, etched with symbols that looked suspiciously like names. Thousands of them. Some were carved, some glowed faintly. Some looked as though they had tried to fade and failed. Elric felt a tightness in his chest, because of course he did. "This is where it started," came a voice. He turned slowly, no sudden movements. He had learned long ago that magical places disliked enthusiasm. A woman stood near the roots of the tree. Or perhaps she had always been there. She wore a dress the color of twilight, which was ironic given the circumstances, and her hair fell like spilled ink down her back. Her eyes reflected stars that did not exist here anymore. She smiled, not warmly, not coldly, just knowingly. "You're early," she said. Elric frowned. "That's unlikely." She laughed softly. "Everyone says that." She introduced herself as Maera, which meant something very old. Something like keeper or witness or regret, depending on the century. She explained the problem gently, as if explaining it too loudly might wake the forest even more. Long ago, someone made a bargain, because someone always does. A king, desperate to protect his people, asked the forest for eternal safety. No night, no predators, no fear. The forest agreed. Forests are generous like that, also literal. And so darkness was pushed away, locked out, forgotten. But in doing so, the forest lost its dreams, its rest, its balance. Magic lingered too long. Romance grew stale. Autumn never finished becoming winter. And now, centuries later, the forest was exhausted. It needed help. It needed someone willing to walk into its deepest light and bring back something very small. A shadow. Elric closed his eyes. Of course it needed that. "Why me?" he asked, already knowing the answer. Maera tilted her head. "Because you still remember how to sleep." The forest listened and waited, and somewhere far away, night stirred, stretching like an old friend who had not been invited for far too long. By the time the traveler realized the forest truly did not sleep, his own body had already started to argue with him. Not loudly, just quietly. A stiff neck, a dull heaviness behind the eyes. That soft, irritated confusion you get when your mind keeps expecting night and it never arrives. The light did not change. It did not soften into evening or tilt toward gold. It stayed pale and even, as if the forest were stuck forever in that hour just before dinner, when nothing dramatic happens and everyone is slightly tired for no clear reason. The traveller, whose name, for now, doesn't matter, walked beneath trees that cast shadows but never lengthened them. Leaves rustled without urgency, birds sang, paused, and sang again, never realizing they should probably be asleep by now. Of course they weren't. Nothing was. He sat down on a mossy root eventually, because even heroes need to sit sometimes, especially reluctant ones. He pressed his palm into the ground, half expecting warmth, half expecting nothing at all. The soil was cool, not cold, just rested, which felt unfair. He noticed then that the forest smelled like autumn, even though the leaves were still green. That faint scent of drying wood, old apples, distant smoke, a season that suggests rest without fully committing to it. Romance too, if you were feeling generous, or lonely, or both, which he was. He stood again and continued walking, because staying still felt like a mistake. The path, if it could be called that, curved gently, as if designed by someone who hated sharp turns and surprises. And that someone, he suspected, was the forest itself. Eventually, he came upon a clearing. Not a dramatic clearing. No beams of light or conveniently placed stones. Just a wide, quiet space where the trees leaned back slightly, like people giving each other room during an awkward conversation. In the center stood a woman. She looked solid, but only barely, as if she had been assembled out of light that hadn't fully agreed to stay put. She wore a dress the color of fallen leaves, layered and soft, trailing just above the ground. Her hair was dark, threaded with silver that might have been age, or moonlight, or neither. Her eyes reflected the forest too clearly to belong entirely to a human. She watched him approach without moving, which, of course, meant she had been expecting him. "Let me guess," the traveller said, stopping a polite distance away. "You're the forest." She smiled faintly. "I am one of its memories," she said. Her voice was quiet, but carried easily, like a bedtime story told by someone who knows you're already drifting. He nodded, because that seemed safer than arguing. "The forest doesn't sleep," she continued. "It forgot how." "Right," he said. "That happens." "It shouldn't," she replied. "Night is a kindness." He considered that. He hadn't thought of night that way before. Mostly, he thought of it as inconvenient. She gestured for him to sit, and this time he did without hesitation. The ground beneath the clearing felt different, softer somehow, like it remembered being rested once and missed it. "We used to dream," she said. "Trees, animals, roots, stones, even the air would drift. And now, she said, we remain awake, always watching, always growing, never forgetting." That explained the silence he hadn't noticed until now. The forest wasn't peaceful. It was alert. "Something took the dark," he said. She nodded. "Something feared it." "Of course it did. Someone always does." She told him then, in the slow way stories prefer, about the time before the forgetting, when night would arrive like a gentle guest, when shadows softened rather than sharpened, when creatures curled into themselves and the forest breathed inward instead of out. But one autumn, because it is always autumn when things begin to go wrong, a ruler passed through. Not a king exactly, more like a collector of rare thoughts, of ideas that refused to behave. He had been afraid of sleep, of dreams, of what waited in darkness when the world stopped performing. So he asked the forest for light, and the forest, generous and foolish, agreed. It offered a glow that would keep nightmares away, a steady brightness, nothing dramatic, but light, once given, is hard to take back. He never returned what he borrowed, she said. The traveler sighed. Let me guess, I have to. She smiled again, this time with something like relief. You must remind the forest how to close its eyes. That sounds metaphorical. It is, she said. Unfortunately. She stood and reached out, touching the trunk of a nearby tree. At her touch, the bark darkened slightly. Not much, just enough to suggest shade, just enough to make the light hesitate. Darkness is not absence, she said. It is rest. The traveler felt something settle in his chest then. A memory of sleep so deep it felt like falling backward into warm water, of dream that didn't need meaning to matter. I don't know how to bring night, he said quietly. You already carry it, she replied. All travelers do. You just forgot, like we did. She stepped back, her form thinning slightly, like mist reconsidering its commitment. When the time comes, she said, you must choose to stop looking. And then she was gone. Not vanished, just no longer needed. The clearing remained, the light remained, but something had shifted. A pause had entered the air, small and tentative. The traveler stood alone again. He rubbed his eyes. For the first time since entering the forest, they felt heavy. Somewhere far above, a leaf fell. Not quickly, not dramatically, just enough to suggest that even endless light might eventually grow tired. And for the first time, the forest waited. The forest, as it turns out, did not appreciate being stared at too closely. That was something the traveler, whose name we are still politely ignoring because names have power here, and also because the forest is nosy, learned around the third hour of walking beneath eternal daylight. The light never shifted, not warmer, not cooler, not softer. It was the same pale, late afternoon glow you might associate with an autumn day that refuses to commit to evening. The kind of light that makes you think, surely sunset is coming. And then, of course, it doesn't. Because why would it? Leaves rustled, but not with urgency. Birds sang, but their songs looped, repeating phrases like old vinyl records with gentle scratches. Somewhere in the distance, a brook flowed endlessly, sparkling like it had somewhere better to be but couldn't quite remember where. The traveler walked and walked and walked. And because this is a forest that forgot darkness, it also forgot the concept of rest. Roots never cooled, moss never slept. Even the air felt mildly caffeinated. Eventually, the traveler noticed the trees were watching, not in a threatening way, more like how elderly relatives watch you attempt to set up a Wi-Fi router. Curious, mildly judgmental, patient in the way only ancient things can be. One oak leaned just slightly closer than the others. Its bark was pale silver, its leaves tinged with autumn gold, frozen mid-season forever. "You walk like someone who expects night," the oak said. It didn't move its mouth. Trees rarely bother. The traveler stopped, slowly, because sudden movements felt rude. "I suppose I do," the traveler replied. "Most places eventually get tired." The oak hummed, a sound like wind remembering how to sigh. "Tiredness left us," it said. "Long ago. It slipped out between the roots and never returned." That seemed inconvenient. As the traveler continued, the forest grew denser but never darker. Sunlight filtered through layers of leaves that should have blocked it entirely. It didn't. Light here behaved like a guest who refused to leave. Along the path, if it could be called that, stood lanterns. Unlit lanterns. Hundreds of them, hanging from branches, resting beside stones, tucked into hollows. Beautiful things. Bronze. Glass etched with stars. All empty. The traveler touched one. Cold. Deeply cold. The kind of cold usually reserved for midnight thoughts and unsent letters. A whisper passed through the leaves. "Careful," said a voice. This one belonged to a woman sitting on a fallen log, brushing her fingers through a bowl of glowing seeds. She wore a cloak the color of late autumn, burnt orange fading into dusk purple. Her hair was streaked with silver, though her face was young in the tired way poets often are. "Lanterns remember," she said. "Remember what?" the traveler asked. She smiled, because of course she did. "Darkness." That earned a pause. She introduced herself as Illyra, keeper of almost nights, which sounded official, but also like a job that hadn't existed in a while. "These lanterns," she explained, gently setting the bowl aside, "once held night, proper night, the soft kind, the kind that lets forests exhale." "And now?" the traveler asked. Illyra shrugged. "Now they're empty, much like the moon's schedule." That felt sarcastic, or resigned, possibly both. They walked together after that. The forest seemed calmer with Illyra present, like a room that behaves better when the librarian is nearby. As they moved, she spoke, not dramatically, not urgently, but the way someone tells a story they've told themselves many times, usually while staring into nothing. "There was a time," she said, "when night came gently. Stars filtered in like shy guests. Owls had opinions. Roots cooled. Even the river slept." "What happened?" the traveler asked. Illyra exhaled. "Someone decided darkness was inefficient." "Of course they did," she went on. "Long ago, because it's always long ago, a council of forest elders and human scholars gathered. Autumn had been harsher that year. Crops failed. People feared what they couldn't see. so they asked for more light. Just a little, they said, just enough to keep the shadows away. Magic, being magic, does not do just enough. The night was pushed back, not banished, just delayed, and delayed, and delayed again. Until one evening simply never arrived. The moon knocked once, twice. Eventually, it stopped trying. That's when the forest forgot how to sleep, Illyra said quietly. They reached a clearing. At its center stood a tree unlike the others, massive, pale. Its branches stretched upward like frozen lightning. Where leaves should have been, small motes of dim starlight clung, trembling. The heartwood, Illyra said. It remembers night, but it cannot release it alone. The traveler approached. The air felt heavier here, not threatening, just solemn, romantic in the old tragic sense, like a love story paused at the wrong moment. The traveler placed a hand on the bark, and suddenly they remembered darkness, not fear, not monsters, but warmth under blankets, candlelight, the relief of closing one's eyes, the soft romance of autumn evenings when the world agrees to be quiet. The tree pulsed. Somewhere, very far above, something shifted. Illyra watched closely. "You feel it too," she said, not a question. The traveler nodded. "What do I do?" She hesitated. "Nothing dramatic," she said. "This forest has had enough of that." "Good, because drama is exhausting." "Just stay," Illyra continued, "until the forest remembers it's allowed to rest." The traveler sat beneath the heartwood. The light did not fade, not yet, but for the first time, it softened. And somewhere, deep beneath the roots, darkness stirred, not as an ending, but as an invitation. "Let's linger here a moment longer." The traveler wakes again, not because of light this time, but because of sound, which is strange, because this forest has been loud since the beginning. Birds arguing, leaves whispering, trees creaking like they're remembering things they shouldn't. But this sound is different, softer, slower, almost embarrassed to exist. It's humming, not a melody you could hum back, more like the forest is clearing its throat and hoping no one notices. The traveler sits up on the mossy ground, brushing glowing pollen from their coat. The light here never fades, but it does shift. It leans warmer now. Late afternoon pretending to be eternal. Autumn pretending it never learned the word night. And the humming seems to come from everywhere. From the roots, from the air, from the quiet spaces between thoughts. The traveler follows it, because of course they do. That's how these things always go. Nobody sensible turns around in a glowing forest that hums at them. As they walk, they begin to notice something unsettling. The trees are tired, not dying, not sick, just exhausted. Branches droop like shoulders that have carried too much daylight. Leaves glow, but unevenly now, as if the light costs more than it used to. One tree sighs, a real sigh, long and wooden and deeply dramatic. "Yes," the traveler says quietly, I feel that too. The path opens into a clearing where the light gathers thicker, pooling like honey. At the center stands an ancient oak, wide, knotted, and shimmering with old magic. Its bark is carved with symbols that look less like runes and more like names. Thousands of them. Names etched over names, some glowing bright, others faded almost to nothing. The humming comes from this tree. And then, because the forest has decided we're doing this now, the oak speaks. You hear it too, the tree says. Its voice is low and slow, like it's been practicing patience for centuries. I do, the traveler replies, because politeness still matters, even here. Good, says the oak. That means you're still human enough. The traveler doesn't ask what that means. They're learning. Some answers arrive better when uninvited. This forest forgot darkness, the oak continues. But darkness did not forget us. The traveler sits at the base of the tree because standing feels disrespectful and also exhausting. Everyone keeps saying that, they say, but no one explains how a forest forgets night. The oak creaks. Leaves shimmer. We were protected, it says, once. And here comes the history. You can always tell. The voice changes, gets slower, more careful, like someone opening an old album they swore they'd burned. Long ago, the oak says, this forest lived in balance. Light and dark, growth and rest, magic and silence. Autumn knew when to arrive, night knew when to fall. Sounds nice, the traveler murmurs. It was, the oak agrees. Then the kings came. Of course they did. They were frightened of night. The oak continues, frightened of dreams, of loss, of forgetting their names when sleep took them. The traveler exhales. Royals, always terrified of things they couldn't conquer with gold. So they asked the forest for eternal light, the oak says. And the forest obliged. Why? The traveler asks. Why would it agree? Because it loved them, the oak says simply. Because forests, like people, sometimes confuse love with obedience. There's a pause. The humming grows softer, sadder. The spell worked, the oak continues. No night, no darkness, no rest. The kings slept without dreams. Their romances stayed shallow and bright. Their magic remained untouched by shadows. And the forest? The traveler asks. The oak doesn't answer right away. We forgot how to sleep, it says finally. The traveler looks around, at the glowing leaves, the restless air, the birds that never land long enough to rest. And now? The traveler asks. Now we are unraveling, the oak replies, slowly, politely, quietly, the way things do when they are too tired to scream. The traveler nods. This makes sense in the way tired truths often do. So what do you need from me? They ask. The oak's branches tremble. You must remind us, it says. Not force, not fight, remind. Remind you of what? The traveler asks. The oak's roots glow brighter. Of the first night. And suddenly, the traveler knows. They don't know how or why. But the knowledge settles into them like an old memory they forgot was theirs. The first night wasn't darkness. It was rest. It was a soft closing of the world's eyes, a promise that nothing had to grow or shine or prove itself for a while. Romance bloomed there. Magic deepened there. Autumn learned how to let go there. Night wasn't an enemy. It was mercy. "I don't know if I can do that," the traveler admits quietly. The oak hums again, warmer now. "You already carry it," it says. "That's why the forest let you in." The light around the clearing flickers, just once, barely noticeable, like a blink. The traveler feels it in their chest, a loosening, a softness, the memory of sleep without fear. Somewhere deep beneath the roots, something ancient stirs. And for the first time in centuries, the forest pauses. Not sleeping yet, but listening. And that, as it turns out, is how rest begins. The traveler leans back against the oak, eyes half closed, while the humming shifts into something slower, something closer to a lullaby. And the forest, glowing and weary, waits to remember what comes after light. By the time the forest reached what might have once been called afternoon, though it hadn't known afternoon in years, the light began to feel tired. Not darker, not dimmer, just slower. If light could yawn, this was it. Leaves still glowed, but less enthusiastically, like they were fulfilling a long-term contract they no longer remembered signing. The air grew thicker, warmer, and somehow softer. Even the constant birdsong had dropped into a lower register, less chirping, more mumbling. One bird seemed to forget its own song halfway through and simply trailed off, which honestly felt relatable. Eldrick noticed it first in the trees. They leaned, not dramatically. No creaking protests or cinematic bending, just a subtle tilt, like someone settling deeper into a chair they'd been sitting in far too long. Branches drooped with relief. Roots loosened their grip, not enough to fall over, just enough to sigh. "Yes," Eldrick murmured, though he wasn't sure to whom. "That's it. That's the posture." The forest didn't respond with words. It never had. But something in the way the moss softened underfoot, something in the way the light stopped pressing down and began resting instead, suggested it was listening. The path ahead blurred slightly, edges melting into one another. The forest, it seemed, was beginning to forget where one thing ended and another began, which, historically speaking, is usually how sleep starts. Eldrick reached a clearing he did not remember passing before, though memory had become unreliable here. The clearing was wide and circular, its center marked by a pool so still it looked like poured glass. The surface reflected the canopy above with unnecessary clarity, every leaf duplicated, every glow softened. At the pool's edge sat something new, a bench, wooden, old, patient. It looked like it had been waiting centuries just to be sat on once. Eldrick hesitated, then sat. Immediately, the forest exhaled. Not loudly. No wind, no dramatic rustle. Just a collective easing, like tension leaving a jaw. The sound was almost inaudible, but deeply satisfying. The kind of noise you feel more than hear. He leaned back. The bench adjusted, because of course it did. "This place is dangerous," Eldrick muttered lazily, feeling his eyelids grow heavier. Comfort like this should come with a warning label. Above him, the sky remained bright, stubbornly day-colored. But something had changed. The blue had softened, warming at the edges. Not sunset exactly, more like the memory of sunset, recalled by someone half asleep. Eldrick remembered something then. Autumn. Not just the season, but the feeling of it. The hush that comes after harvest. The romance of endings that don't feel tragic yet. The world cooling itself gently, leaf by leaf, night by night. The forest had skipped all that. It had gone straight from growth to glow, from life to too much life. No wonder it couldn't sleep. "You missed the in-between," he said quietly, staring into the pool. His reflection stared back, older than he remembered, or maybe just more honest. "The slowing down part," he continued, "the letting go, the permission to stop shining." The pool rippled, though nothing touched it. Images surfaced, not visions exactly, more like emotional impressions. Shadows of moments the forest had never experienced. Long twilights, first stars, moths gathering around dim lanterns, lovers whispering because the night made secrets feel safe. Romance lived there. Magic, too. The gentle kind. The kind that didn't demand attention. Eldrick's breathing slowed to match the rhythm of the clearing. In, out. Like the forest was teaching itself how to breathe again. From somewhere deeper in the trees, a sound emerged. A yawn. It wasn't human. Too wide. Too echoing. But unmistakable. Eldrick smiled. "Good," he whispered. "You're learning." The ground vibrated faintly, not with movement, but with release. The light overhead dimmed by the smallest fraction, barely noticeable, but enough to change everything. Colors softened, edges blurred further. The forest didn't lose its glow. It just stopped clinging to it. Somewhere, something laid down. Maybe a hill. Maybe a memory. Maybe the forest itself. Eldrick's eyes closed, just for a moment. He dreamed, though he couldn't say how long. In the dream, the forest was younger, or older. Time behaved strangely there. Leaves fell, not because they were dying, but because they were tired of holding on. Darkness arrived slowly, politely, asking permission before settling in. The forest answered yes. When Eldrick woke, the light had changed again. Not night, not yet, but the first shadow had appeared. A real one. It lay beneath a tree like a cat, curled and calm, doing absolutely nothing. And somehow, that nothing felt like the most important thing that had happened in centuries. Eldrick stood, the bench sighed, disappointed but understanding. "Don't rush it," he told the forest gently. "Sleep isn't something you force. It's something you allow." The shadow lengthened, just a little. The forest, finally, was learning how to rest. And Eldrick, who had carried too much wakefulness of his own for far too long, felt something inside him loosen as well. Because helping something else fall asleep has a funny way of reminding you that you're allowed to, too. By the time autumn leaned fully into the forest, the leaves had begun doing that soft copper thing they do when they're tired of being green but not quite ready to give up. The forest noticed, of course. It noticed everything. That was kind of the problem. The light still hadn't dimmed, not even a little. It hovered in that permanent late afternoon glow, like the world's longest Sunday that simply refused to end. No sunset, no twilight, just a stretched-out golden hum that made the trees restless, and the shadows feel embarrassed, like they wanted to exist but didn't want to make a scene. Edrin had been walking for hours, or days, or some polite amount of time that the forest preferred not to specify. Time here behaved like someone who had read about clocks but never actually used one. He'd learned a few things since arriving. First, the forest hated silence. Not noise, just silence. Leaves rustled even when there was no wind. Branches tapped each other gently, like they were checking in. Somewhere, water trickled constantly, as if afraid that stopping would cause something irreversible. Second, the forest remembered too much. And third, this was the one that sat heavy in his chest. The forest was tired. Edrin reached a clearing that hadn't been there before. Or maybe it had, and the forest had just decided now was a good time to admit it. At the center stood a tree older than the others, its bark pale and smooth, marked with faint lines that resembled closed eyes. Of course it did. He approached slowly, because when you're in a magical forest that refuses to sleep, rushing feels rude. The air here felt different, thicker, warmer, like the forest was holding its breath. "You're the keeper," the tree said, without opening its eyes. Edrin sighed softly, not dramatically, just enough to acknowledge the situation. "Everyone keeps saying that," he replied. "I was really hoping they were mistaken." The tree's voice was slow, layered, and tired in a way that only ancient things could be tired. Not sleepy tired, existentially tired. The kind of tired that comes from remembering too many beginnings and not enough endings. "You came when the light would not leave," the tree said. "That means you carry darkness with you." Edrin frowned. "I really don't." "Oh, everyone thinks that," the tree replied, mildly amused. "They confuse darkness with cruelty, or fear, or whatever happened at dinner last night. But darkness is just rest." That landed somewhere deep. The tree continued. "Once, this forest slept. Night came gently. Shadows stretched. Owls did their whole mysterious thing. But then the people came." Edrin waited. He was learning that interrupting ancient beings usually just extended the conversation. "They were afraid," the tree said, "of wolves, of loss, of dreams they couldn't control. So they asked the forest to stay awake, to keep watch, to protect them." "And the forest agreed," Adrian said. "Yes," the tree replied. "Of course it did. Forests are like that, very bad at boundaries." Edrin sat down at the base of the tree because this felt like a sit-down story. They asked us to remember everything, the tree continued. Every footstep, every name, every promise. Night makes forgetting easier. We were not allowed to forget. The light pulsed faintly, as if reacting to the memory. And now? Edrin asked. And now we are so full of memory that there is no room for darkness, the tree said. No room for rest, no room for dreams to drift away when they are finished. Edrin thought of his own nights back home, of lying awake, replaying things that should have faded years ago. Conversations, regrets, people whose names still showed up uninvited. Romance, too. The kind that lingers not because it was perfect, but because it was unfinished. So what do you need from me? He asked quietly. The tree's eyes opened for the first time. They were deep and black, not frightening, just empty, like the sky before stars remember where they belong. You must teach us how to forget, the tree said. Edrin laughed softly. It slipped out before he could stop it. That's ambitious, he said. I'm terrible at forgetting. Yes, the tree replied. That is why you are perfect. The forest shifted around them. Leaves settled. The constant rustling softened just a little, like the forest was leaning closer. You carry unspoken goodbyes, the tree continued. You know what it means to let something rest without resolving it. Edrin swallowed. There it was, the thing he didn't talk about, the person he never quite released, the autumn that stayed with him longer than it should have. You must walk the forest, the tree said, and speak what no one else would. Tell the trees it is allowed to sleep. That's it? Edrin asked. Just tell them? The tree smiled in the way only bark can smile. Nothing powerful is ever complicated, it said. It is simply difficult. The light dimmed, just barely, enough that Edrin wondered if he was imagining it. For the first time since he entered the forest, a shadow lingered. Not long, not dramatic, but it stayed, and the forest exhaled. If you're still awake, congratulations. If you're half asleep, even better. That means it's working. So, when we last drifted off together, the forest had begun doing something wildly inconvenient for itself. It started remembering. Not all at once, of course. This forest never did anything efficiently. It remembered the way royals remember inconvenient cousins, slowly, vaguely, and with mild irritation. Leaves began to dim, not fall, just dim. As if someone had turned the brightness down by half a notch and then immediately apologized. The traveler noticed first, because of course he did. He had become that person, the one who notices things and then regrets noticing them. He stood on a path that hadn't existed yesterday, or maybe it had. Time here was flexible, like royal genealogies when things got awkward. The glow between the trees softened. Greens leaned toward blue. Gold leaned toward copper. The air cooled gently, the way autumn does when it wants you to stop pretending summer is still in charge. This feels illegal, the traveler muttered. The forest did not disagree. Somewhere deeper in the woods, a bell rang. No tower, no rope, just a bell deciding it was time to be heard. That sort of confidence usually belonged to emperors and cats. The sleepless forest had not heard a bell in centuries. It paused. Every root, every branch, every overly enthusiastic fern. And then, very quietly, the forest exhaled. This is where things get interesting, but not exciting. We don't do exciting here. Exciting keeps people awake. This is more of a slow, administrative shift in reality. The first stars did not appear in the sky. They appeared in puddles. Small pools of water along the path reflected pinpricks of light that were not technically above them. The traveler knelt, stared, and immediately felt underqualified. "That's not how reflections work," he said. The puddle, being a puddle, offered no comment. Elsewhere, the forest spirits, who had spent generations running on pure insomnia and unresolved purpose, began to sit down. Not dramatically, no collapsing, just sitting on logs, on stones, on the soft moss they had fluffed nightly out of nervous habit. One of them, an old bark-skinned woman who had once advised 3 different kings and watched all of them ruin it, closed her eyes. Nothing bad happened. That alone was alarming. The traveler reached the glade of unfinished sunsets, a place the forest had used as a workaround. When night never came, the forest had simply frozen dusk and called it a solution. Very aristocratic thinking, really. Here, the sky had always been permanently orange, romantic, exhausting. Now the orange thinned. Purple seeped in like ink dropped into water. Slowly, patiently, with intent, the forest shuddered, not in fear, but in recognition. "Oh," it seemed to say. "Oh, right. This." The traveler felt it too, a weight in his chest. Not sadness, not joy, something heavier and softer. The feeling of remembering a song you loved before you knew you would ever miss anything. He sat, because apparently everyone was sitting now, and as he did, he remembered why he had come. Not the task. That was simple. Help the forest sleep. But the reason. He had once lived in a place that never rested, a court that never dimmed its lights, a family that treated silence like betrayal. Nights filled with whispering strategies and long grudges disguised as conversations. He had learned to stay awake because rest was dangerous, because things happened when you weren't watching. The forest had learned the same lesson. "Staying awake doesn't stop loss," he said aloud softly. "It just makes you tired when it arrives." The trees leaned closer. That's not metaphorical. They physically leaned. Branches creaked, leaves brushed together like gossip that had finally turned sincere. In the distance, an owl tried to remember how to exist. It failed at first, came out wrong, more confused pigeon than omen. But it tried again, adjusted, got quieter, progress. The bell rang again, slower this time, like it was already getting sleepy. The traveler stood and followed the sound, deeper into the forest where the oldest roots lived, where the forest's memory pooled thickest, like royal archives no one wanted to catalogue. There he found the Keeper of Light. Every sleepless place has one. This one was tall, thin, and glowing, not brightly, but stubbornly, like a candle someone refused to blow out because it had sentimental value. The Keeper had once been human. Of course he had. All long-term mistakes start that way. "I was told to keep the light burning," the Keeper said. His voice crackled, like paper left too close to a flame. "So I did." "For how long?" the traveler asked. The Keeper shrugged. "Longer than the people who told me." Classic. "They said darkness would bring danger," the Keeper continued. "That sleep would invite forgetting. That night was weakness." The traveler nodded. He had heard that speech before. Different crowns, same fear. "And did it work?" the traveler asked. The Keeper looked around, at the exhausted spirits, the dimming leaves, the stars slowly, finally taking their places above instead of below. "No," he said, "but stopping now feels like admitting they were wrong." Ah, there it was, the most powerful curse of all. The traveler stepped closer, not aggressively, just honestly. "Being wrong doesn't undo what you protected," he said. "It just lets you rest." The Keeper hesitated. The forest waited. And then, just a little, the Keeper lowered the light. Not out, just enough. Darkness did not rush in. It arrived politely, like a guest who knows it has been expected for a very long time. Shadows softened, the sky deepened, crickets remembered their lines. The forest finally blinked, and somewhere, far beyond the trees, autumn leaned back, smiled, and let the night take over. As our traveler ventured deeper into the forest, the perpetual glow of the sun above began to feel strangely oppressive, like staring at a candle that never wavered but never burned out. Shadows refused to form properly, bending awkwardly around roots and stones, giving the whole place a sense of being slightly untethered from reality. Our traveler, whose name we might as well call Elias, because why not, noticed the flowers here had an almost desperate vibrancy, as if they were holding on to every drop of light to prove they existed. Of course, Elias had not come here for botany lessons. He had come for the forest itself, the magical entity that refused to rest. Locals spoke of it in hushed, awe-filled tones, half warning, half reverence. The forest that forgot darkness, they called it. It was said that if one lingered too long, they would forget the rhythm of night and day themselves, their dreams dissolving into the relentless day, which, if you're like Elias, is a bit terrifying but also slightly thrilling. He moved cautiously along a winding path lined with ancient trees, each with bark that shimmered faintly, like mica dust caught in sunlight. There was a magic here, subtle but insistent, that made him feel like the forest was aware of his presence. And perhaps, in some tiny way, it was. Every rustle of leaves sounded intentional, like whispered conversations between beings that had long ago forgotten humans entirely. At one point, Elias came across a clearing where the trees formed an irregular circle, their branches interlacing like fingers holding a secret. Here the light seemed softer, less harsh, as if the forest itself had decided to grant him a moment of respite. In the center, a small pond reflected the sky with perfect clarity. Yet, something was off. The reflection showed stars, tiny, distant points of light, despite the sun still hanging high. Elias knelt beside the water, peering into this contradiction, and realized the pond wasn't just reflecting, it was remembering. It remembered the night, the way the forest used to be, and perhaps it was trying to whisper a secret to him. As he listened, a gentle voice, soft as the wind through the leaves, spoke, though no lips moved. "You must help us sleep, or we shall never wake." The words were neither threatening nor urgent. They were a plea, the kind only beings who had known eternal wakefulness could utter. Elias's heart thumped quietly. Helping a forest sleep sounded simple in theory, but he suspected, like all things magical, it would be anything but. From the shadows of the trees, small creatures emerged, shapes unfamiliar yet strangely comforting. They hovered just above the ground, translucent and glowing faintly, like spirits made of twilight. Each one carried a fragment of the forest's memory, a songbird's last tune before sunrise, the rustle of a fox in the underbrush, the sigh of a sleeping child far away. They circled him in delicate patterns, whispering snippets of sound that the human ear struggled to hold. Elias realized then that the forest's sleeplessness was not simply an absence of night, but a tapestry of all the moments that should have been, woven together into a fabric too bright to rest. His task, then, was not to cast darkness over it, but to weave a lullaby powerful enough to soothe centuries of wakefulness. The creatures began guiding him deeper still, their soft luminescence forming a path. And though the journey was quiet, and the forest seemed to watch with patient curiosity, Elias could not help but feel that this was a story much larger than himself, a story that would teach even the most weary travelers about patience, magic, and the gentle, necessary pull of night over day. Elias followed the luminous creatures along a winding corridor of trees that seemed older than time itself. The leaves whispered softly above him, brushing together as though murmuring secrets they had collected over countless years. It was an autumn unlike any he had ever known. The air crisp, tinged with spice and melancholy, and the light golden but never fading. Magic hummed in the spaces between the branches, subtle yet insistent, like the gentle vibration of a distant bell. At the heart of the forest, Elias came to a clearing dominated by a massive tree, its trunk so wide he could not wrap his arms around it even if he tried. The bark shimmered faintly, silver and gold interwoven, and the branches stretched endlessly upward, disappearing into the ceaseless sunlight. The creatures gathered here, forming a soft circle at its base. It was clear that this tree, ancient and knowing, was the forest's anchor, the core of its sleepless existence. Elias knelt and laid a hand against the bark. The sensation was electric but gentle, like pressing a finger against a stream of warmth. He felt the forest's memories pulse beneath his skin. Countless dawns without dusk, the laughter of children who never slept beneath its canopy, and the soft, unending sigh of creatures who longed for night. This was no ordinary forest, and he was no ordinary traveler. Somehow, in some way that defied understanding, he had been chosen, or perhaps stumbled upon, a duty far greater than anything he had imagined. The creatures whispered again, guiding him to a small collection of objects scattered around the base of the tree. Feathers from birds that had sung forgotten songs, delicate stones that glowed faintly with captured sunsets, and shards of mirrors that reflected dreams instead of faces. Elias realized the forest had been preparing him for this moment, storing pieces of its memory and magic in the hope that one day someone might help it rest. He picked up a feather, and as he held it, it hummed softly, vibrating with the resonance of a lullaby he did not yet know. The stones, too, seemed to murmur, each one a note, a chord, a fragment of melody waiting to be assembled. The mirrors flickered with images, a fox curling beneath a tree, a child's hand brushing through golden grass, a star reflected in a pond. These fragments, Elias understood, would form the lullaby that could finally grant the forest the gift of sleep. Sitting cross-legged on the mossy ground, Elias began experimenting, arranging the feathers, stones, and mirrors in a pattern that felt right to him. It was a delicate dance of trial and error, of listening to the whispers of the forest and responding in kind. Slowly, a melody began to emerge, faint at first, but growing with each careful movement. The forest seemed to lean in, the leaves trembling ever so slightly, as though holding their breath. As the notes wove together, a sense of calm began to spread through the clearing. Shadows, previously absent, started to gather at the base of trees, tentative and shy, stretching slowly as though discovering themselves for the first time. Birds perched quietly in the branches, heads tucked, eyes closing against the strange, gentle magic of the melody. Even the sun seemed to soften, its light warm and golden rather than harsh and unyielding. Elias could feel the forest responding. The deeper he went into the creation of the lullaby, the more he understood the forest's unique rhythm. A rhythm that was not simply day and night, but a layering of countless moments, both remembered and forgotten. And as he continued, he realized that this lullaby was not just for the forest, but for all who had ever longed for the peace of night, for dreamers, wanderers, and those who had lost their way in endless wakefulness. The luminous creatures danced around him, their soft glow pulsing in time with the emerging melody. A gentle wind stirred the branches, carrying the first hint of true autumn darkness, not heavy or fearful, but tender and embracing. Elias felt a tear slide down his cheek, not from sadness, but from the profound, quiet beauty of what was unfolding, a forest learning, at long last, to sleep. And in that moment, Elias understood that magic, patience, and love, gentle, enduring, patient love, were enough to soothe even the most sleepless places. He continued weaving, each note, each whisper, a promise that the night would come, that darkness was not a punishment, but a gift, and that even in a forest that had forgotten its rhythm, rest could always be found. The lullaby grew stronger now, a full symphony carried not just by Elias's hands, but by the very air of the forest. The feathers, stones, and mirrors he had arranged began to hum with a life of their own, vibrating in harmony with the wind, the branches, and the murmurs of the unseen creatures hidden in the canopy. It was as if the forest itself had learned the melody, remembering how to breathe, how to pause, how to let itself finally rest. Shadows spread like gentle ink across the forest floor, softening the once perpetual glow that had filled every corner. The leaves, which had shimmered endlessly under unyielding sunlight, now rustled in slower, deliberate motions, as though testing the rhythm of night after a long, unfamiliar day. The luminous creatures swirled above, weaving patterns of silver and amber in the dimming light, their whispers turning into soft chants that echoed the forest's deep exhale. Elias felt a sudden weight lift from his shoulders, not a relief of burden, but a sense of profound alignment with everything around him. The forest was no longer a chaotic, sleepless realm. It had begun to remember the natural order of time, the subtle ebb and flow between wakefulness and rest. Each note of the lullaby seemed to plant roots in the very soil, intertwining with the ancient magic of the place, grounding it, and offering a gentle promise of continuity. In the distance, he heard the faintest of sighs, long and winding, carrying centuries of wakefulness, and he realized it came from the forest itself. The trees, tall and unyielding, shivered not in fear, but in relief. Every branch, leaf, and hidden creature seemed to exhale in perfect unity, finally allowing the darkness to seep in, soft and tender, wrapping the forest in a blanket of restful night. Elias's fingers trembled slightly as he continued, guiding the final sequences of the melody. He had almost finished weaving the lullaby, each fragment of song, feather, and reflective shard finding its place in the intricate tapestry of the forest's memory. Tiny motes of light, like captured fireflies, drifted lazily through the air, settling on branches and stones, marking the forest's first moments of true sleep. A subtle, magical mist began to rise, curling through the trees in spirals, carrying the scent of autumn leaves, distant rains, and forgotten dreams. The wind softened into a whisper, and in its gentle exhalations, Elias felt the touch of something unseen, but unmistakably present. Gratitude. The forest, ancient and unyielding, was speaking to him, acknowledging the careful patience, the listening, and the love he had poured into restoring its balance. As darkness deepened, a delicate romance unfolded in the air, a quiet, intangible magic that only comes when night is welcomed after an eternity of light. It was the romance of restoration, of harmony between worlds, the waking and the dreaming, the seen and the hidden, the restless and the calm. And somewhere, deep within the shadows, Elias sensed that he was no longer merely a traveler. He had become part of the forest's story, a living note in its lullaby, bound by invisible threads of magic that would never fully release him. Finally, the lullaby reached its last note. Elias paused, hands hovering over the instruments of light and memory, and waited. A profound silence followed, not empty, but filled with presence, with the slow, steady heartbeat of a forest at peace. Leaves no longer shimmered unnaturally, sunlight no longer pressed endlessly. Creatures of all shapes and sizes rested where they had always belonged. For the first time in centuries, the forest slept. Elias leaned back on the soft moss, feeling the gentle weight of night settle over the land. He closed his eyes, and for a moment he, too, allowed himself to rest, embraced by the calm that he had helped to create. And as he drifted in that serene quiet, he understood something he had not known before, that sometimes the deepest magic is not in grand displays or fearsome power, but in the simple, patient act of helping the world around you remember how to breathe, how to pause, and how to dream. Above, a single star appeared in the sky, bright and steadfast, the first to witness the forest's slumber. It winked, perhaps knowingly, perhaps playfully, and Elias smiled in the darkness. The forest had remembered night, and in doing so, it had reminded him of something equally precious, that even in places where the light never fades, the gentle touch of care and quiet magic can bring true rest, and sometimes even dreams beyond imagining. The forest was quiet now, truly quiet, save for the occasional gentle sigh of leaves settling into their new rhythm. The unending glow that had tormented every branch and nook had faded into soft, velvety darkness. Shadows stretched and yawned across the mossy ground, weaving together like the threads of a well-loved blanket. Every creature, from the tiniest insect to the towering trees themselves, had surrendered to the embrace of night. Elias rose slowly, brushing moss from his sleeves, feeling the cool weight of the evening air. He had walked these paths countless times during his journey, but never had they felt so alive in their calm. It was not the restless kind of life that thrummed and rattled endlessly. It was a deep, patient, knowing kind, a life that understood sleep as not weakness, but necessity. He wandered toward the center of the forest, where the largest tree stretched its limbs into the darkening sky. Its trunk shimmered faintly with residual magic, a soft glow left behind by centuries of wakefulness. Elias pressed a hand against the bark, feeling a heartbeat beneath his palm. It was slow, steady, comforting. He realized that the forest had not only found sleep, it had remembered how to care for itself, how to hold its own stories gently in the folds of night. Above him, the stars had begun to dot the sky. They flickered softly, almost shyly, as if unsure of their place after so long. And yet they shone, tiny beacons of magic and hope. A breeze whispered through the branches, carrying with it a hint of autumn, crisp leaves, distant rain, and the faint scent of dreams long forgotten. It was as if the forest itself was exhaling, a deep, fulfilling sigh of relief and gratitude. Elias smiled, knowing his work here was done. He had not forced the forest to sleep. He had guided it, coaxed it, reminded it of its own rhythms. And in that process, he had discovered something equally profound about himself. That patience, care, and small acts of gentle magic could ripple through the world in ways far greater than he had imagined. He began to walk back along the winding paths, leaving behind the glowing shards and humming feathers that had helped weave the lullaby. They would continue to hum softly, carrying echoes of his song for anyone who might wander into the forest in years to come. And as he reached the edge, where the light of the first moonbeam touched the ground, he paused. For a final moment, Elias looked back at the forest, a vast expanse of trees and shadows alive in their new, quiet way. The trees swayed gently in the night breeze, the stars winked above, and the distant hum of nocturnal life filled the spaces in between. And then, with a heart full of calm, he stepped out, leaving the forest that forgot darkness to its well-earned rest. The world beyond awaited, but Elias carried a piece of the forest with him, its patience, its quiet magic, and its understanding that even the longest days can find their night. And perhaps someday, when another traveler wandered into the forest, its lullaby would rise again, gentle as ever, weaving dreams for those who had forgotten how to sleep. The forest slept, the stars watched, and in the deep, soft quiet of the night, all was well. The forest stirred once more, but not from the unrest that had plagued it before. This time, it was subtle, like the gentle stretching of limbs after a long nap. Elias returned weeks later, drawn by a faint hum he thought he'd imagined. But the forest remembered him, or perhaps remembered the lullaby he had sung into its heart. The paths were clearer now, bathed in the soft silver of a moon that seemed to glow with approval. Tiny lights flickered between branches. Not fireflies, but something more deliberate. Tiny guardians of the night. They danced slowly, tracing arcs across the treetops, leaving sparkling trails of magic that smelled faintly of autumn spices and distant rain. Elias walked slowly, listening, realizing that the forest had begun to create its own stories, humming them softly to itself. He approached the grand tree at the center, the one whose bark had pulsed with residual magic. This time, it whispered back to him. Not words exactly, but impressions. Memories of quiet nights, of creatures resting, of stars blinking like tiny eyes that finally felt safe. He pressed his hand to the trunk, and the magic rippled outward, brushing his hair like a gentle wind. And then he saw her, a figure woven of mist and shadow, standing at the edge of a small clearing. She was the spirit of the forest, perhaps, or a fragment of the first night's magic, or maybe just a dream given form. Her eyes glimmered with every color of the autumn sky, and when she smiled, the leaves trembled with joy. "You helped us sleep," she said, her voice like wind through dry leaves. Now the forest dreams on its own, but it will never forget you. Elias nodded, feeling a warmth he hadn't expected. He realized that sleep was not just rest, it was memory, magic, and life intertwining. And now he was part of it. As he turned to leave, he knew that the forest would continue to change, to shift, and to grow. But it would always carry the lullaby they had shared together, a song for those who needed to remember how to rest. And with the first true whisper of dawn painting the horizon, Elias left the forest that forgot darkness, carrying its magic in his chest, its quiet wisdom in his steps, and a gentle hope that some stories, even in darkness, never truly end. Days passed in the village below, but Elias's mind stayed suspended in the soft hum of the forest. He returned often, though never for long, each visit a quiet ritual. The forest had begun to dream, yes, but its dreams were delicate, fragile as gossamer wings brushing against autumn leaves. One evening, as the sun dipped low, casting amber streaks across the treetops, Elias noticed something unusual. A small glimmering path had appeared, winding like silver ribbon between the sleeping trees. Curious, he followed it, moving slowly, letting the forest's magic guide him. It led to a pond he didn't remember, where the water shimmered with the reflections of stars, even though the sun still lingered on the horizon. Floating above the water were tiny lanterns, each one holding a memory. Some flickered faintly, whispers of songs and dreams, forgotten moments of joy and sorrow, soft laughter and unspoken words. Elias realized these were the forest's collected memories, its way of keeping track of everything that had ever passed beneath its canopy. He reached out, touching one, and for a brief moment, he could feel a child's wonder at finding their first firefly, the embrace of a long-lost friend, the quiet hope of a letter never sent. A breeze stirred, carrying a hint of cinnamon and smoke, and the figure of the forest spirit appeared again. She moved with the grace of drifting clouds, her eyes reflecting the pond's lanterns. "The forest remembers all," she said softly, "and now it lets some memories walk free, carried by those who seek them." Elias smiled, understanding that the forest's magic was no longer just about sleep. It was about connection, about threads linking past and present, dreamers and dreamt of. He wandered along the glowing path, realizing each memory he touched left the forest a little lighter, a little more at peace. By nightfall, the stars overhead winked knowingly, as if they too understood the forest's quiet magic. And Elias knew, in that gentle moment, that he had become more than a visitor. He was a part of its story, a keeper of its whispered dreams, a witness to its autumnal heart. Night had fully embraced the sky, though the forest itself still carried traces of lingering twilight. Elias stayed on the silver-lit path, walking slowly, savoring each step as if it were a meditation. The forest had changed since his first visit. It no longer thrummed with restless energy, but hummed softly, like a lullaby sung just for him. Each leaf seemed to lean slightly, nodding in acknowledgement, the branches whispering secrets in a language he almost, but not quite, understood. As he moved deeper, he noticed shadows moving differently than before. Not the threatening kind of shadows that once made him uneasy, but soft, curling shapes that danced lightly on the forest floor. They reminded him of smoke from a fire he had once sat beside, of autumn evenings by a hearth, sipping something warm and sweet while the wind pressed against his window. The shadows felt alive, playful yet gentle, as if the forest itself was learning the rhythm of rest. The lantern-lit pond from the previous visit glimmered in the distance, but now more lanterns floated toward him, carried by invisible currents in the air. He reached for one, curious, and felt warmth, a gentle thrum, like a heartbeat. The memory inside it was a simple moment, a child chasing a dog through a meadow, pure joy untainted by time. Elias could almost hear the laughter, soft as a wind chime in a gentle breeze. He wondered, did the forest hold only good memories, or had it absorbed sadness too? The forest spirit appeared again, stepping from the shadows as though materializing from the night itself. Her presence was calm, comforting, and slightly sorrowful, like a melody half remembered. "The forest keeps all of it," she said in her gentle, airy voice. "The laughter, the cries, the quiet sighs. It holds the stories of every life that has brushed against it, every traveler who dared to dream beneath its trees." Elias felt a shiver, not of fear, but of reverence. He realized the forest was not just a place of rest, but a mirror of the world itself, holding its beauty, its fleetingness, its impermanence. He walked along the glowing path, observing the delicate balance of magic around him. Here, in this realm of suspended dreams, time seemed less linear. Moments stretched and folded, overlapping, colliding softly like clouds drifting in slow motion across the sky. A soft wind lifted him slightly, carrying the faint scent of rain and amber leaves. Somewhere above, a branch creaked, and a tiny owl blinked at him with wide, knowing eyes. It was as if the forest were acknowledging him, testing whether he was ready to understand its deeper truths. He reached the heart of the forest, where an ancient tree stood, taller than anything he had ever seen, its roots stretching deep and wide, its trunk carved with runes that pulsed faintly with an inner light. "This tree," the spirit whispered, "is the soul of the forest. It remembers what you cannot and dreams what you dare not." Elias traced a finger along one of the glowing runes, feeling a tingling warmth seep into his skin. Each pulse carried memories of centuries. A fox family nestled in the underbrush, a deer cautiously drinking from a clear stream, birds soaring above, weaving stories with their songs. The forest's heartbeat was slow now, steady, rhythmic, a lullaby for the world itself. And then he understood. The forest had not forgotten darkness. It had embraced it in a new way. Night was no longer a void to fear, but a canvas for dreams, for memories, for magic. The trees, the lanterns, the shifting shadows, they were all part of an intricate symphony. Every whisper of wind, every rustle of leaves was a note, and Elias was learning to hear it. The forest spirit smiled faintly, a luminous shimmer around her face. "You have come far, traveler, but there is more to see. Some dreams are still unsettled, some memories still restless. Will you walk further and help the forest finish its song?" Elias nodded, feeling a strange peace wash over him. The path ahead shimmered faintly, leading deeper into the unknown. Somewhere between the autumn-scented air and the ethereal glow of magic, he realized that he was no longer merely a visitor. He was becoming a guardian, a witness, a storyteller. And the forest, in return, was teaching him how to dream, truly and deeply, in harmony with everything around him. As he stepped forward, the forest seemed to sigh, and the stars overhead blinked in approval. The night was still young, but it no longer felt endless or lonely. It felt like home. Elias continued along the luminous path, the ground beneath his feet soft as moss and faintly warm, as if the forest itself was cradling him. Each step brought a new whisper, a different flicker of light or shadow. Lanterns floated gently overhead, swinging like slow-motion fireflies, their glow casting long, curling shadows that seemed almost like playful spirits stretching and yawning after a long day. He could hear the subtle hum of the forest's heartbeat, steady, calm, almost melodic. And it reminded him of lullabies his grandmother once sang, soft and unhurried, comforting in their repetition. As he walked, he noticed subtle change. Some trees had begun to bend slightly toward him, their branches forming gentle arches, as if guiding him deeper into the heart of the forest. The wind carried scents of autumn, fallen leaves, warm earth, faint smoke from somewhere distant, perhaps a long-forgotten hearth. Each inhale seemed to pull memories from his own past, fragments of dreams he had almost forgotten, brushing against him like delicate wings. He realized that the forest didn't just hold its own memories, it absorbed the dreams of those who wandered through it. Ahead, a small clearing opened, bathed in soft silver light. At its center was a pool of water, perfectly still, reflecting the trees, the sky, and the floating lanterns as though the forest had condensed itself into a single mirror. The surface shimmered faintly, moving like silk when touched by the softest breeze. Elias knelt beside it, watching as tiny motes of light danced across the water. Each mote seemed to carry a memory, a forgotten song, a whispered promise, a smile long past. He realized the forest had been collecting these moments for centuries, holding them in perfect stillness until someone worthy came to witness them. From the edge of the clearing, the forest spirit appeared again, stepping lightly on the soft moss. Her presence was calm, gentle, almost ethereal, like a wisp of mist brushing against the dawn. "The forest is learning," she said softly, her voice a blend of wind through leaves and water over stones. "It has remembered, it has rested, but there are still whispers that need tending. Some dreams have been forgotten too long, and some shadows need gentle guidance to sleep." Elias felt a shiver, not of fear, but of awe. he realized that his journey was not simply about helping the forest sleep. It was about understanding the delicate balance of light and dark, of memory and forgetting, of dreaming and waking. Every leaf, every stone, every ripple of water carried stories of lives that had brushed past this place, stories he could feel but could not yet fully grasp. A sudden movement caught his eye. A small fox, its fur glinting like spun gold under the silver light, stepped from behind a tree. Its eyes were unusually bright, almost luminous, and it watched him with careful curiosity. Elias smiled faintly. "Hello, little one," he murmured. The fox circled him once, then darted ahead, pausing as if beckoning him to follow. Elias hesitated, then took careful steps after it, feeling a sense of anticipation mixed with calm. The path wound higher, spiraling gently, and as he ascended, he noticed the trees thinning, revealing glimpses of the night sky. Stars shimmered faintly, but even they seemed different, softer, more patient, like they had learned to wait for the forest to find its own rhythm. Elias understood that the journey upward was not merely physical, it was symbolic, a climb through layers of memory, dream, and magic toward the heart of the forest's soul. Eventually, the fox led him to a giant oak, its trunk wider than a small house, roots spiraling into the earth like veins of silver and gold. The runes carved into its bark pulsed faintly, not with light, but with gentle warmth. Elias knelt again, tracing the grooves with his fingers, feeling a connection that was both ancient and immediate. The forest spirit appeared beside him, placing a hand lightly on his shoulder. "This is the heart," she whispered. "All dreams converge here. All memories rest here. To help the forest sleep, you must understand it, as one would understand a child, with patience, care, and a soft voice." Elias closed his eyes, letting the energy of the forest flow through him. He could feel the hum of life, the memories, the whispers, the laughter, and the quiet sorrows. He realized that the forest was not asleep, nor was it awake. It existed in a delicate liminal space, where time and memory blurred, where dreams could breathe freely. And he, for the first time, felt truly connected, as if the forest had not just accepted him, but invited him to be a part of its ongoing story. He stayed there for hours, tracing patterns in the runes, listening to the quiet symphony of rustling leaves, moving water, and faint, distant animal calls. The forest's pulse slowed with each moment, the air growing cooler, softer, as though night itself was settling into a comfortable rhythm. And when Elias finally rose, he knew that the forest was on its way to rest, not through magic or force, but through understanding, empathy, and the gentle patience of one who truly listened. The fox curled at his feet, and the forest spirit nodded, a faint smile illuminating her ethereal features. "There is more to see, more to guide," she said. "But the heart is calm. You have done well, traveler." Elias felt a warmth spreading through him, a sense of peace deeper than anything he had known. And as he walked back down the silver-lit path, lanterns floating gently around him. He understood that the forest's story, and his own, was far from over. The forest seemed to breathe around Elias as he followed the winding path downward, each step accompanied by the soft rustle of leaves and the occasional distant call of nocturnal creatures. Yet even as he moved, he felt the lingering presence of the heart of the forest within him, a pulse of quiet magic that seemed to flow through his veins, syncing his own rhythm with that of the sleeping trees. The air was cool but comforting, carrying the faint scent of pine, damp earth, and something faintly sweet. Perhaps the memory of blossoms that had long since fallen. The fox darted ahead again, its golden fur shimmering like liquid sunlight caught in twilight, and Elias found himself instinctively quickening his pace. Every so often, this animal paused, turning to make sure he followed, almost as though it were both guide and companion. A bridge between the conscious world and the delicate dreams that hovered in the forest's depths. And hovering just behind, invisible yet present, the forest spirit seemed to drift along, her steps silent, her eyes glimmering with a gentle knowing. As they progressed, Elias noticed subtle shifts in the environment. Some trees appeared to shimmer faintly, their bark curling and straightening in a slow, hypnotic rhythm, almost as if they were stretching after a long, uninterrupted nap. Small creatures peeked from hidden hollows, observing him with curious eyes, their forms half glimpsed in the dim autumnal glow. The forest was alive, yes, but it was alive with a gentle, patient energy, not the frantic urgency that had driven it through endless wakefulness. He realized that every movement, every rustle of a leaf, every whispered note of wind was part of a quiet orchestra, a lullaby the forest was slowly learning to perform. Eventually, the path opened into a wide glade where a shallow stream wound lazily around moss-covered stones. The water shimmered like liquid glass, reflecting the soft glow of the hovering lanterns, and the first faint hints of stars peeking through the gaps in the canopy. Elias approached the stream and knelt, dipping his hands into the cool, flowing water. It was more than refreshment. It felt like a connection, a conduit through which he could sense the very essence of the forest. The whispers he had been hearing were clearer here, murmuring in a language he didn't yet fully understand, a mix of memory, dream, and something older, more primal. The forest spirit stepped beside him, her presence softening the edges of the world. "You've come far," she murmured, her voice blending seamlessly with the babbling of the stream. "But there are still echoes that must be guided to rest. Shadows cling to the forgotten corners, remnants of the sleepless years. Some dreams are strong, resilient, almost stubborn. They resist the night, afraid to relinquish their hold." Elias listened, letting her words sink in. He realized that the forest's wakefulness wasn't born of malice or error. It was born of care, of attachment, of memories so vivid and unresolved that they refused to fade. The task ahead wasn't simply to enforce sleep. It was to guide these lingering fragments into gentle rest, to help them release without fear. He rose, brushing damp moss from his sleeves, and began walking along the stream's edge, following the fox's lead. Here, the forest seemed denser, more intricate. Branches tangled overhead, forming arches and tunnels of golden-brown leaves, and faint, glimmering motes of light hovered like fireflies. Each moted light represented a memory, a dream, a fragment of consciousness left unguarded. Elias extended a hand toward one, and it drifted toward him, warm and soft, settling into his palm like a living ember. He felt its story without words, the laughter of a child, a soft melody, the echo of a promise whispered long ago. He allowed it to dissolve gently, fading into a calm shimmer that floated into the forest around him. The fox stopped at the base of an enormous willow, its sweeping branches brushing the ground, forming a delicate, sheltered space. Elias knelt, feeling the cool earth beneath him, and realized this willow was the anchor for many of the forest's most stubborn memories. Shadows and motes swirled lazily through its branches, hesitant, reluctant, clinging to the life of the waking forest. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply, letting the quiet lull of the wind and the soft gurgle of the stream center him. Slowly, deliberately, he began to whisper, softly narrating fragments of stories and lullabies he remembered, and the forest seemed to respond. The shadows eased, the motes relaxed, and the willow's branches shifted slightly, releasing their grip. Time stretched in the glade, minutes and hours blending into a soft, dreamlike haze. Elias felt the weight of the forest's trust upon him, but also a profound serenity. This was not a task of force or command. It was an intimate act of listening, understanding, and gentle persuasion. Each shadow released, each memory soothed, brought the forest closer to its long-awaited slumber. And as the first subtle hints of night began to creep over the edges of the forest canopy, Elias understood that the forest was learning, slowly but surely, to embrace darkness again, not as a threat, but as a comfort. The fox curled beside him, its tail flicking lazily. The forest spirit hovered above, nodding, her eyes reflecting the glimmering lantern light. Elias allowed himself a quiet sigh, a soft smile spreading across his face. He knew there was still more to guide, more shadows to soothe, more dreams to release. But the forest's heart was steady, its pulse slowing, and the once tireless realm was finally discovering the art of sleep. And as Elias rose to continue his journey deeper into the forest, he realized something profound. Sleep, like memory, like dreams, was not a state to be forced. It was a gift, cultivated through patience, understanding, and the gentle touch of one who truly listens. As Elias ventured further into the forest, the landscape began to shift in ways subtle, yet profound. The air itself felt heavier with anticipation, each inhalation infused with the quiet energy of dreams waiting to settle. Shadows that had clung stubbornly to the trees now drifted lazily like smoke, curling around moss-covered roots before dissipating into soft, muted light. Even the wind seemed to slow, carrying a gentle hum that echoed faintly like a lullaby from another time. The fox led him to a grove that felt different from the others. A stillness hung here that was almost tangible, as if the forest itself had held its breath. The trees, towering and ancient, formed natural columns around a clearing, their branches interwoven so tightly that only specks of amber and gold light filtered through. Here, the residual wakefulness was strongest. Small, restless glimmers, fragments of unfinished dreams, incomplete stories, and memories unclaimed, hovered nervously, their shapes flickering between recognizable forms and soft, abstract swirls. Elias knelt again, letting his hands brush against the earth, feeling its quiet warmth seep into him. He whispered to the shadows and glimmers, softly recounting forgotten songs, the gentle cadences of lullabies, and tales of autumn evenings where time stretched like honey. One by one, the motes of light drifted toward him, easing into his palms and dissolving into a calm luminescence that spread outward, suffusing the grove with tranquility. The forest responded to each gesture. Branches swayed gently, leaves rustled with approval, and the faintest shimmer of starlight began to appear above the canopy. As he worked, the forest spirit appeared closer, her presence a soothing aura that blended with the dim glow of fading motes. She gestured toward a massive tree at the center of the grove, its trunk thick and gnarled, its roots sprawling like veins across the forest floor. "This is the heart," she murmured. "The forest's pulse, its memory, its heartbeat. If we can help it sleep, the rest will follow." Elias approached the tree, feeling a low vibration beneath his feet, subtle yet insistent. He placed his palms against the bark, and suddenly the murmurs of the forest intensified. Hundreds of whispers, overlapping but harmonizing, as if the entire forest was speaking in one collective voice. He closed his eyes, allowing the words to wash over him. Fragmented stories, half-remembered dreams, songs he didn't know he remembered, and memories too delicate to be spoken aloud. He didn't need to understand them all. He only needed to listen. Slowly, deliberately, he began to weave his voice into the forest's chorus. Soft, rhythmic, gentle. A cadence designed not to command, but to guide. He narrated tales of magical autumn evenings, of foxes that carried whispered secrets, of rivers that sang lullabies, and clouds that cradled the sky's dreams. With each phrase, each breath, the restless glimmers softened, folding into the tree as if it were their final resting place. The gnarled branches shivered, releasing their clinging shadows, which floated upward and dissolved into the newly forming night. The fox sat silently at his side, watching, occasionally flicking its ears at a stray shimmer of light. And the forest spirit hovered above, her eyes glimmering with a quiet, satisfied pride. The clearing, once tense with anticipation and faint unrest, became a sanctuary of stillness. Elias felt the culmination of the forest's exhaustion, the weariness of endless wakefulness, settle into a profound calm, as if a deep, collective exhale had passed through every tree, every root, every hidden hollow. Then, with the slow inevitability of a tide, darkness began to return. Not a harsh, frightening void, but a gentle, enveloping shadow, soft and protective. The leaves glowed faintly under the first starlight, the motes of previously restless dreams now drifting calmly like fireflies settling into the night. Elias realized that his task was almost complete. The forest, once so obstinate in its wakefulness, was finally embracing the rhythm of sleep, learning to trust the quiet, the darkness, the gentle cadence of the night. He stepped back from the heart of the grove, brushing moss from his sleeves, and looked around. The entire forest seemed transformed, lighter yet heavier in a contented, grounded way. Even the distant streams moved slower, more reflective, their surfaces catching the glimmers of newly awakened stars. He knew that, by morning, the forest would have fully slept for the first time in ages, and the dreams it nurtured would rise in harmony with the new night, free from the clinging weight of endless wakefulness. The forest spirit floated closer, her voice a soft murmur blending with the wind. "You've done well, Elias. The forest trusts you now. It will sleep, and in sleeping, it will heal." Elias felt a quiet satisfaction, a calm understanding that this journey, this communion with a living, dreaming entity, had changed him as much as it had healed the forest. He nodded, taking in the scene, the gentle sway of trees, the glimmering starlight, the calm of a world finally at rest. And as he turned to follow the fox out of the grove, a final, subtle whisper brushed against his ears, carried on the soft, nocturnal wind. "Sleep, at last. Sleep, at last." The forest had finally settled, but Elias lingered for a moment, letting the soft nocturnal sounds wash over him. Each leaf whispered in the night wind, each branch sighed in relief, and even the smallest roots seemed to pulse with calm. There was a serenity here that hadn't existed in centuries, a quiet magic born of patience, care, and gentle persistence. He walked slowly through the clearing once more, taking in the heart of the grove where the massive, gnarled tree stood, now luminous with a calm inner glow. The motes of light that had once drifted restlessly hovered peacefully, shimmering softly like tiny stars at rest. Elias reached out, brushing his fingers against the bark one last time. It was warm, alive, and filled with a sense of gratitude that didn't need words. The fox padded silently to his side, its amber eyes reflecting the faint starlight. For a moment, they both stood in quiet companionship, the forest around them breathing in unison with their calm. Then the forest spirit appeared again, gliding gently through the mist, her presence luminous yet soft. She smiled, her voice a melodic whisper that seemed to come from every corner of the grove. "You've done more than help the forest sleep, Elias. You've reminded it, and yourself, of the rhythm of rest, the gentle embrace of night, the beauty of letting go." Elias nodded, feeling a deep sense of completion. The journey had been quiet, unhurried, and full of subtle revelations. It hadn't been about heroics or battles, but about understanding, listening, and guiding. The forest had taught him patience, and in return, he had helped it remember its own forgotten heartbeat. Above, the first true stars of the night glittered like delicate gems, casting their light upon the canopy. The nocturnal chorus of the forest rose in a soft, soothing hum, the rustle of leaves, the distant calls of creatures that had finally settled into sleep, the faint trickle of streams that now moved with a gentle, reflective pace. It was a lullaby for the world, a calm exhale that stretched across every shadow and every secret corner of the forest. Elias felt the magic in the air, a quiet, persistent warmth that wrapped around him like a blanket. He knew this night, this return to rhythm, would remain in the forest for many cycles to come. Even when the seasons changed, when autumn winds blew and winter's frost crept across the land, the forest would remember how to sleep, how to trust the gentle pull of darkness. The fox nudged his hand, and Elias chuckled softly. "Time to leave, my little companion," he murmured. Together they walked toward the edge of the grove, where the first hints of dawn kissed the horizon with pale, gentle light. It was not a harsh morning, not a bright intrusion, but a soft awakening, perfectly balanced by the night that had just passed. As they reached the boundary where the forest met the open lands beyond, Elias looked back once more. The heart of the forest glowed softly in the dim light, the trees swaying with contented rhythm, the motes of light drifting lazily in the new day. He whispered, almost to himself, almost to the forest, "Sleep well, and may your dreams be sweet." The fox disappeared into the morning mist, and Elias stepped into the open fields, carrying with him the calm, gentle magic of a forest that had finally learned to rest. Every breath felt lighter, every step quieter, every thought slower and softer. He knew that the world outside would continue its noise and bustle, but the memory of the forest's tranquility would stay with him. A quiet reminder that even the most restless places can find peace. And so, the forest slept. For the first time in what felt like forever, darkness wrapped its arms around every tree, every root, every hidden hollow. Dreams flowed freely, songs unclaimed were remembered, and a deep, perfect stillness settled like a gentle cloak over the land. Elias walked on, a quiet smile playing across his lips, knowing that some magic is not flashy or loud. It is soft, patient, and endlessly comforting, a lullaby whispered to the world itself. The forest had forgotten darkness, yes, but now it remembered sleep, and in that remembrance it had found its true magic.